The sting of his palm against my cheek was a white-hot explosion of shame. It echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence of the grand ballroom. Then came the laughter, a wave of cruel, sparkling sound that washed over me, pinning me to the cold marble floor where I had fallen. Julian stood over me, his face a mask of aristocratic contempt, his hand still raised slightly. He had just slapped a woman he believed to be a penniless nobody in front of 200 of the city's most powerful people. Du Wertloses stuck nix, he had snarled in German, confident I wouldn't understand. You worthless piece of nothing. But I did understand. I understood every syllable of his hatred. They all thought they knew who I was. Mia, the quiet, plainly dressed girl who had somehow caught the eye of Liam Sterling, the younger son of a powerful family. To them, I was a charity case, a gold digger, an unwelcome stain on their pristine, generational wealth. They had no idea who I truly was, who my real husband was, or the storm they had just unleashed. They were laughing now, but they were about to have their entire world dismantled, piece by piece, right before their very eyes. If you stay until the very end of my story, you will see a revenge so complete, so absolute, it will leave you speechless. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, 3 years ago. My name is Mia, and this is the story of how I learned that true strength is not about the money you have, but the dignity you refuse to let anyone take from you. It started with a simple, almost naive idea. My husband, Alexander, and I were deeply in love, but we were also trapped. He was Alexander Sterling, the reclusive, almost mythical head of Sterling Global, a man whose wealth was so vast it was spoken of in whispers, like a legend. I had met him not as a billionaire, but as Alex, a man reading a worn paperback in a quiet city park. We fell in love with each other's minds, our shared laughter, our quiet moments. The weight of his name, he said, was a cage. It changed people. It twisted kindness into sycophancy and affection into calculation. He wanted something real, just once. So we devised a plan, a pact made in the quiet of our ridiculously large, yet empty, penthouse apartment overlooking the city. We would marry in secret, a simple courthouse ceremony with 2 witnesses who signed non-disclosure agreements thicker than phone books. And then, publicly, I would be introduced to his world not as his wife, but as the fiancée of his younger brother, Liam. The idea was to test the waters, to test his family. Alexander believed, or perhaps hoped, that his younger brother had a core of decency that the rest of his family lacked. He wanted to see if Liam could stand up for someone he supposedly loved, even if that person had no status. He wanted me to see the world he came from, unvarnished, before I was insulated by the Sterling name. It was a test of character for everyone involved, myself included. Alexander would remain in the shadows, a distant cousin who was always traveling for business, watching from afar. So I put away my designer clothes, gifts from a husband I couldn't acknowledge. I packed up my life of quiet luxury and moved into a modest apartment, one Liam's family paid for, a fact they never let me forget. I became Mia, the girl from a small town with a simple job and a lot of hope. And for 2 years, I endured. The matriarch, Eleanor Sterling, was a woman sculpted from ice and disapproval. Her smile never reached her eyes, which scanned my simple dresses and inexpensive shoes with a look of profound disappointment. "Oh, dear," she would say, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Is that the best you could do? We must get you a clothing allowance. It's simply embarrassing for Liam to be seen with you looking so provincial." Her insults were always framed as offers of help, tiny daggers wrapped in silk. She would host lavish dinner parties and seat me at the very end of the table, next to a distant cousin nobody spoke to. She would ask me about my family, knowing full well my parents were middle-class teachers, and then sigh dramatically. "How wonderful it must be," she'd say to the table at large, "to live such a simple, uncomplicated life, free from the burdens of legacy and expectation." Then there was Clara, Liam's sister. She was younger, prettier in a sharp, predatory way, and she viewed me as her personal project for torment. She would accidentally spill wine on my only nice blouse, her apology a tinkling laugh. "Oh, Mia, you're so clumsy. Don't worry. I'm sure it wasn't expensive." She would invite me shopping on Rodeo Drive, only to lead me into stores where the price of a single handbag was more than my yearly salary. watching with undisguised glee as I flushed with discomfort. The sales associates, taking their cue from her, would ignore me completely or watch me as if I were a potential shoplifter. Clara found this endlessly amusing. And Julian. Julian wasn't a Sterling by blood, but a cousin, a man whose arrogance was his defining feature. He was handsome in a cruel way, with a sneer that seemed permanently etched onto his lips. He treated me not with the passive aggression of Eleanor or the catty malice of Clara, but with open, unabashed contempt. He called me the charity case to my face. He would interrupt me mid-sentence to say, "No one cares about your little opinions, sweetheart." He moved through the world like he owned it, and in his eyes, I was just a piece of dirt he had to step over. Through it all, there was Liam, my public fiancé, my supposed protector. In private, he was sweet, apologetic, and full of promises. "Just give them time, Mia," he would plead. "They don't know you like I do. Just try a little harder to fit in. We're the clothes mom buys you." Laugh at Julian's stupid jokes, I tried. For him, for the plan, for the love I thought we were building, I tried. I wore the suffocatingly expensive clothes Eleanor bought me, feeling like a doll she was dressing up. I smiled politely at Julian's cruelty. I accepted Clara's fake apologies with a grace I didn't feel. But every time I was insulted, every time I was made to feel small, I would look to Liam. And every single time, he would look away. He would clear his throat, or check his phone, or conveniently find someone else to talk to. His loyalty was a ghost, a promise that vanished the moment it was tested. His fear of his family was greater than his love for me. My real husband, Alexander, would call me late at night. His voice was my anchor. "How are you holding up?" he would ask, and I could hear the tension in his words. "I'm fine." I would lie, not wanting to admit how much their disdain cut me. Eleanor was her usual charming self today. There would be a long pause on his end. "Mia," he'd say, his voice low and dangerous. "Just say the word. I can end this in 5 minutes. We can burn the whole plan down." No. I'd insist, my own pride a stubborn fortress. "I can do this. I want to see this through." I wanted to prove that I was strong enough. I wanted to believe that Liam would eventually find his courage. I was a fool. The breaking point came, as it always does, at the most public of moments. It was the Sterling family's annual foundation gala, a night of performative charity and staggering opulence held in the grand ballroom of a hotel they owned. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of clinking champagne glasses. Diamonds glittered on every neck and wrist, a constellation of cold fire. Eleanor had insisted on choosing my dress. It was a deep sapphire blue, beautiful but uncomfortable, a little too tight in the shoulders, a constant reminder that it wasn't mine. As I stood beside Liam, smiling until my face ached, I felt like an imposter, a feeling his family had worked so hard to cultivate. The inciting incident was small, almost laughably so. Eleanor was showing off a new acquisition for the family's collection, a vintage Cartier brooch, a spray of diamonds and sapphires shaped like a peacock feather. It was passed around a small, fawning circle of her closest friends. I admired it from a distance, having learned long ago not to touch anything valuable. An hour later, Clara's shriek cut through the dull roar of the party. "It's gone," she cried, her hands flying to her chest in a gesture of theatrical panic. "Mother's brooch. It was right here on the table." A hush fell over the immediate area. Eleanor rushed over, her face pale with genuine alarm. "What do you mean, gone?" "It can't be gone." The search was brief and frantic. Then, Clara's eyes, sharp and malicious, landed on me. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying across the room. Mia was standing right there. She was staring at it all night, every head turned in my direction. The weight of 100 suspicious stares was a physical force. I didn't touch it," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. My heart began to pound against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Of course you didn't, dear," Eleanor said, but her tone was acid. "But perhaps we should just check. To rule it out, you understand." Liam looked at me, his eyes wide with panic. "Mom, this is ridiculous," he said, but his voice was weak, lacking any conviction. Julian stepped forward, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. He seemed to relish the moment. "Oh, I think it's a perfectly reasonable suggestion. Let's check the charity case's purse." He didn't wait for my permission. He snatched my small, simple clutch from my hands. My cheeks burned with humiliation as he upended it, spilling its meager contents onto a small table. My phone, a tube of lip balm, my keys, and a $20 bill. No brooch. For a second, I felt a rush of relief. But the look on Clara's face told me it wasn't over. Her purse is too small, she said sweetly. Where else could she hide something? Her eyes deliberately flickered down my body. The implication was vile, and it hung in the air. Julian's grin widened. He took a step closer, his cologne, a sharp, citrusy scent, suffocating me. Maybe it's in a pocket, he said, his voice a low growl. Or maybe. He reached out, his hand moving not towards a pocket, but towards the neckline of my dress. I flinched back instinctively. Don't touch me, I said, my voice shaking but firm. What's the matter? He taunted, the crowd now a silent, watching circle. Got something to hide. I looked at Liam, my eyes pleading with him. Do something. Say something. Stop this. He stood frozen, his face a mask of conflict and fear. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He took a small step back, away from me. And in that moment, my heart didn't just break, it shattered. His retreat was a physical blow, a betrayal so complete it stole the air from my lungs. He had made his choice. He chose them. He chose their power, their money, their approval, over my dignity. Seeing Liam surrender, Julian felt completely emboldened. His contempt boiled over into rage. He was a man who had never been told no, and my defiance, however small, was an intolerable offense. You come into this family with nothing. He spat, his face inches from mine. You eat our food, you wear our clothes, and this is how you repay us? By stealing. I didn't steal anything. I cried, tears of frustration and anger welling in my eyes. That's when he switched to German, the language he and his father used for business, the language he assumed a simple girl like me would never comprehend. Du bist Abscom, he hissed. You are scum. Ein Gieriges, Kleinst Nichts, a greedy little nothing. He saw the flicker of understanding in my eyes before I could hide it. It only enraged him more. How dare I understand his secret insults? How dare I invade that part of his world too? Du Wertloses Stuck Nix, he snarled. You worthless piece of nothing. And then his hand came up. The slap was the sound of a gunshot in the silent room. The force of it sent me stumbling backwards, my heel catching on the thick rug. I fell, my borrowed dress riding up, my dignity scattered like shattered glass on the marble floor. The silence broke. First, a single, shocked gasp. Then, a snicker from Clara. And then, a wave of full-throated laughter from the crowd. They laughed as if they had just witnessed the punchline to the funniest joke in the world. People raised their phones, the small red lights of recording buttons winking at me like cruel, mocking eyes. They were documenting my deepest humiliation. I looked up from the floor, my cheek burning, my vision blurry with tears. I saw Julian, looking down at me with triumph. I saw Eleanor, a thin, satisfied smile on her lips. I saw Clara, filming me with a look of pure, ecstatic glee. And I saw Liam. He wasn't looking at me. He had turned his back. That was the end. The end of my hope, the end of my patience, the end of the foolish girl who thought she could earn their respect. Something inside me went cold and hard and quiet. Get her out of here, Eleanor commanded, her voice ringing with authority. Two burly security guards, men whose salaries were paid by the family, moved forward. They hauled me to my feet, their grips bruising on my arms. I didn't struggle. I walked with my head held as high as I could manage, my bare feet cold on the floor as one of my shoes had come off. They dragged me through the lobby, past the shocked faces of hotel staff, and out through the main doors. They didn't just escort me out. They threw me. I stumbled down the last few steps and landed hard on the cold, damp pavement of the driveway. My dress was torn at the shoulder, my knee was scraped and bleeding. The grand doors of the hotel hissed shut behind me, sealing me out in the cold night air. I sat there for a moment, huddled on the curb, the sounds of the city a distant hum. The laughter from the ballroom still echoed in my ears. I was alone, humiliated and discarded. My grand experiment in love and authenticity was over, ending in abject failure. A young valet, no older than 20, hesitantly approached me. He had seen everything. He held out a bottle of water. Ma'am, he said softly, his voice full of a kindness that felt more painful than the cruelty inside. Are you okay? I looked up at this stranger, this boy with a kind face, and the tears I had been holding back finally came. He was the only person who had shown me a shred of human decency all night. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice hoarse. He averted his eyes, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to just walk away. That wasn't right. What they did, his simple validation, was a balm on my raw-scraped soul. I took a shaky breath, the cold air burning my lungs. The part of me that had been patient and kind and hopeful was gone, burned away by the fire of my humiliation. In its place was a quiet, cold fury. I reached into the torn fabric of my dress, where a small, hidden pocket Alexander had insisted his tailor ad was located. My fingers closed around my real phone, a slim, untraceable satellite model. I looked at the valet. "Can you do me a favor?" I asked. "Of course, in about 10 minutes. Tell your manager to clear this entire driveway. Tell him there's a motorcade arriving and they will require the entire entrance." He looked at me, confused, at the disheveled, crying woman in a torn dress. He probably thought I was delusional, suffering from the shock. But he just nodded. "Okay, ma'am." I scrolled through my contacts to the only name that mattered. I pressed the call button. He answered on the first ring, as he always did. "Mia? Is everything all right?" His voice was warm, concerned. I couldn't speak for a moment, a sob catching in my throat. I swallowed it down, forcing my voice to be steady. "The plan is over," I said, my words flat and empty. The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by an Arctic chill. "What happened?" I told him. I told him everything, in short, clipped sentences. The accusation, the search, Julian's words, the slap, Liam turning his back, being thrown into the street. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. It was a terrifying silence, the kind that precedes a hurricane. When he finally spoke, his voice was unrecognizable. It was a low, controlled, furious sound, the voice of a man who commanded armies and toppled empires. "Where are you?" he asked. "Outside the hotel. On the curb. Don't move," he commanded. "Don't speak to anyone. I am on my way. I am 10 minutes out." He paused, and I could hear the sound of him giving clipped, brutal orders to someone in the background. "Mia," he said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal promise. "I am going to burn their world to the ground." He hung up. I sat on the curb, the phone clutched in my hand, and I waited. The kind valet had scurried off, looking bewildered. A few minutes later, I saw him talking animatedly to a man in a suit, the hotel manager, who glanced over at me with a look of pity and dismissal. But then the valet pointed down the street, and the manager's expression changed. I heard it before I saw it. A low, powerful rumble that grew into the thrum of multiple high-performance engines. At the far end of the long, tree-lined avenue, a pinpoint of light appeared. Then another, and another. A motorcade of 10 identical, gleaming black SUVs, their tinted windows like obsidian, turned into the hotel driveway. They moved with the silent, predatory grace of a wolf pack. They didn't slow down for the valets who scrambled out of the way. They simply took the space, arranging themselves in a formidable semicircle that blocked the entire entrance to the hotel. The lead SUV pulled up directly in front of me. The engine was so quiet I could hear the click of the door as it was opened from the inside. A man in a perfectly tailored dark suit and an earpiece stepped out, his eyes scanning the area before he opened the rear door. Alexander Sterling stepped out of the car. He was not the Alex from the park. This was the man the world whispered about. He wore a dark gray suit that probably cost more than my parents' car, but it was his presence that commanded attention. He was tall and moved with an unnerving stillness, an aura of absolute power radiating from him. His face was calm, but his eyes were blazing with a cold, terrifying fury. He ignored the stunned hotel manager, the terrified valets, everyone. His eyes found me, sitting broken on the curb. The fury in his expression melted away, replaced by a look of such profound pain and tenderness that it made my heart ache. He crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides and knelt before me on the dirty pavement, his expensive suit be damned. He gently touched my cheek, his fingers tracing the red mark left by Julian's hand. His touch was as soft as his eyes were hard. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry I let this happen to you." He shrugged off his suit jacket and wrapped it around my shoulders. It was warm and smelled of him, a scent of sandalwood and pure strength. He helped me to my feet, as if I were made of the most delicate porcelain. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. I looked up at the Grand Hotel doors, behind which my tormentors were still laughing, still celebrating their victory. I thought of Liam's back, of Julian's sneer, of Eleanor's satisfied smile. I took a deep breath, pulling Alexander's jacket tighter around me. The cold fury inside me solidified into resolve. "Yes," I said. He nodded once. He turned to the team of men in suits who had emerged from the other vehicles. They were not just security. They were lawyers, forensic accountants, and corporate raiders, the most elite team of problem solvers money could buy. "Lock it down," Alexander commanded, his voice once again the blade of ice I had heard on the phone. "No one in or out. Cut the Wi-Fi. Take control of the internal audiovisual systems. I want a live feed on every screen in that ballroom in 2 minutes." The men scattered, moving with quiet, terrifying efficiency. Alexander put his arm around me and led me towards the hotel entrance. The doors that had been slammed shut on me now slid open as if in reverence. As we stepped into the lobby, the hotel manager rushed forward, his face slick with sweat. "Mr. Sterling." I had no idea. "We can explain." Alexander didn't even look at him. He held up a hand, and the manager froze, his words dying in his throat. We walked past him, my torn dress and bare feet a stark contrast to my husband's immaculate power. We headed for the ballroom. As we approached, we could hear the music and laughter resume inside. They had already forgotten me. Alexander's head of security, a mountain of a man named Marcus, reached the ballroom doors first. He didn't open them. He kicked them. Both doors burst inward with a deafening crack, slamming against the interior walls. The music screeched to a halt. The laughter died. Every single person in that room spun around to stare. Alexander and I stood framed in the doorway. The silence was absolute, thick with shock and confusion. I could see them all, their faces a gallery of astonishment. Eleanor, Clara, Julian, and Liam. His face was the color of ash. Alexander's voice boomed across the vast room, cold and clear and full of resonant power. He didn't shout, but his words carried to every corner. "Which one of you," he asked, his eyes sweeping across the crowd, "touched my wife?" The word wife hung in the air, an explosion that deafened them all. A collective gasp went through the room. I saw Eleanor's hand go to her throat. I saw Clara's jaw drop. I saw Julian's face drain of all color, his arrogant sneer dissolving into pure, unadulterated terror. He looked from me, in Alexander's protective embrace, to the 10 imposing men in suits fanning out along the walls of the room, and he finally understood. He had not slapped a nobody. He had slapped the wife of Alexander Sterling. Liam took a stumbling step forward. "Alex, what is this? What are you doing here?" "Mia is she is nothing to you." Alexander cut him off, his voice like the crack of a whip. "She was a test, Liam. A test of your character, your loyalty, your spine. And you failed more spectacularly than I could have ever imagined." He guided me gently toward the center of the room, the crowd parting before him like water. He led me to a chair and had me sit, then stood beside me, a sentinel. He looked out at the sea of stunned faces. "For 2 years," he announced, his voice ringing with cold condemnation, "my wife, Mia Sterling, has lived among you. She has endured your petty cruelties, your snobbery, your contempt. She did this as a favor to me. I wanted to believe there was some decency left in this family. I wanted to believe that you could value a person for who they are, not what they have." He let out a short, sharp, humorless laugh. I was wrong. His gaze fell on Eleanor. "You," he said, and she flinched as if struck. "You called her provincial. You humiliated her at every turn because her dress wasn't expensive enough. Let me tell you about her dress. That simple, off-the-rack dress she preferred to wear cost $120. Her personal fortune, which I have had no part in and which she earned herself before she ever met me, is currently valued at $94 million from a tech patent she sold in her early 20s. She could buy this hotel and turn it into a shelter for stray cats if she felt like it. But she never mentioned it, did she? Because she has more class in her little finger than you have in your entire, withered body." Eleanor looked like she was going to faint. Alexander then turned his attention to Clara. "And you," he said, his voice dripping with disgust. "The little actress. You thought you were so clever, with your spilled wine and your fake apologies. You thought you were clever tonight, too. On cue, The massive screens around the ballroom, which had been displaying images of the Foundation's work, flickered to life. They all showed the same thing. A crystal-clear security feed from a hidden camera near the table where the brooch had been displayed. The footage showed Clara, when she thought no one was looking, deftly palming the brooch. It then showed her walking past me, and with a movement so swift it was almost invisible, slipping the peacock feather brooch into the torn lining of my simple clutch purse, which I had left on a chair for a moment. The entire room saw the conspiracy, plain as day. Clara let out a choked sob. "No, that's not." "It is," Alexander said flatly. "And the original footage has already been sent to the district attorney's office. You accused my wife of theft to humiliate her. You, however, will be formally charged with filing a false police report and perjury. You might want to get a lawyer. Though, after tonight, I doubt anyone reputable will take your case." Finally, his gaze landed on Julian. Julian was sweating profusely, his expensive tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap costume. He was trembling. "And you," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft level. "The big man. You put your hands on my wife." He took a step toward Julian, who flinched back so violently he bumped into a waiter, sending a tray of glasses crashing to the floor. "You like to speak German, don't you?" Alexander continued, his own German perfect, crisp, and brutal. "You called her a worthlose stuck nix. Let me tell you what is worthless, Julian. Your company, J-Corp Holdings, is worthless. Or it will be by morning." He switched back to English so everyone could understand. "You see, for the past hour, my acquisitions team has been executing a series of financial maneuvers we have had prepared for months. We triggered a margin call on the massive, ill-advised loan you took out against your company stock. Simultaneously, we bought up your corporate debt from 3 different international banks. As of 5 minutes ago, Sterling Global owns a controlling interest in your company. At the 9 a.m. board meeting tomorrow, which I will be chairing, my first and only order of business will be to liquidate all assets, fire all senior management, and sell the company for parts. You are ruined, Julian." Utterly and completely, Julian's legs gave out, and he sank to his knees, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. "Oh, and this hotel," Alexander added as an afterthought, gesturing around the opulent room. "My family's foundation is supposed to be a majority partner, but my forensic accountants have just discovered that for years, Eleanor, you have been embezzling funds. Millions of dollars. The IRS will be receiving a very detailed package tomorrow. The Sterling family name will be removed from the foundation. Your assets will be frozen. You will be left with nothing. The legacy you were so proud of is over." The room was a tomb. The 200 powerful guests stood frozen, their faces pale with shock. They had come to a party and were now witnessing the public execution of one of the city's most powerful families. Through it all, Liam had been standing, paralyzed. Now he seemed to snap out of it. He rushed forward, his face desperate. "Mia," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Mia, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I was scared. Please, you have to understand." I had been silent, watching Alexander dismantle their world. But now it was my turn. I stood up, feeling the strength of Alexander's jacket around me, a shield of love and power. I looked at Liam, at this weak, cowardly man I had once thought I could love. I felt no anger, only a vast, empty pity. "I do understand, Liam," I said, my voice clear and steady. It didn't waver. "I understand perfectly. You don't love me. You love what you thought I could do for your image. You love the idea of being with someone your family approves of. You are a coward. Your betrayal tonight wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a moment of truth. It was you showing me who you really are." He reached for my hand. "Please, Mia, we can fix this. I love you." I pulled my hand back. "No, you don't," I said, the finality of it like a closing door. Love doesn't turn its back. Love doesn't stand by and watch. Love defends. Love protects. My husband," I said, looking at Alexander, "protects me." "You just stood there." I turned away from him, a dismissal more complete than any insult. I walked over to where Julian was still kneeling on the floor, sobbing. I looked down at him. Then, I looked at the stunned crowd, at their phones now held limply at their sides. "Remember this," I said, my voice ringing with a power I never knew I possessed. "Remember what you saw here tonight. You judged me for my simple clothes and my quiet nature. You mistook kindness for weakness. You thought wealth was about designer labels and expensive cars. You are all wrong. True wealth is having the character not to stoop to this level of cruelty. And you are all bankrupt with that. I turned my back on all of them. Alexander put his arm around me, and together, we walked out of that ballroom, leaving the ruins of their lives smoking behind us. The last thing I heard was the sound of Eleanor Sterling finally, utterly collapsing. 6 months passed. 6 months in which I shed the skin of Mia, the quiet fiancée, and finally embraced being Mia Sterling. Alexander had been true to his word. Julian's company was dismantled. He lost everything. Eleanor and Clara were mired in legal battles, their social status obliterated overnight. The society that had once fawned over them now treated them like pariahs. Liam had simply disappeared, moving to another country in shame. I, on the other hand, had thrived. Alexander had made me the vice president of his new philanthropic division. My secret patent, which I had always downplayed, became the basis for a new technology initiative. I had a purpose. I found that the same quiet observation I used to survive Eleanor's dinner parties made me a shrewd and effective leader. I was good at it. More than good, I was brilliant. I was happy. One evening, I was leaving my new office in the Sterling Tower, a sleek skyscraper that pierced the clouds. As I waited for my car, a valet rushed to open the door. He was wearing an ill-fitting red jacket and a look of weary resignation. Our eyes met, and my breath caught. It was Julian. He looked older, tired. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow shame. He recognized me instantly, and his face went white. He couldn't look at me, staring at the ground as he held my car door. The old me might have felt a surge of triumph, but the woman I had become felt only a quiet sadness. He was a man broken by his own cruelty. "Julian," I said softly. He flinched, still not looking up. "Mrs. Sterling," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. I reached into my purse and pulled out a card for a job placement agency that our foundation worked with. I held it out to him. "This place helps people get back on their feet. Good people run it. Tell them I sent you." He finally looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. He saw no malice in my face, no gloating. Only sincerity. He took the card with a trembling hand. "Why?" he whispered. I gave him a small, sad smile. "Because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I'm letting it go, Julian. For my own sake. What you did was unforgivable, but your life since then has been the consequence. I hope you find some peace." I got into my car without another word. As we pulled away, I saw him in the rearview mirror, still standing there, staring at the small card in his hand, as if it were a lifeline. He was crying. That was the real revenge. Not his ruin, but my peace. Not his downfall, but my ascent. True revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building a life so wonderful that you forget they ever existed. They had tried to make me feel worthless, but in the end, they only showed me my true worth. And I learned that dignity is the one jewel that no one can ever steal from you. And kindness is the greatest power of all.